Aviso. ¿Qué se entiende por libertad de expresión? La libertad de expresión es el derecho de pensar y compartir con otras personas ideas, reflexiones y opiniones, es decir, el derecho a razonar y dar a conocer pensamientos y conocimiento. La libertad de expresión también incluye el derecho a buscar, recibir y difundir ideas, opiniones e informaciones por cualquier medio y con personas de cualquier otro país. Nadie tiene el derecho de prohibir o limitar la libertad de expresión. La libertad de expresión no está restringida a un medio tradicional o electrónico, incluye periódicos, revistas, radio, televisión y medios digitales. El derecho a la libertad de expresión no está limitado o condicionado por las fronteras de los países hacia otros países y desde cualquier lugar. Artículos 6 y 7 de la Constitución Política de los Estados Unidos Mexicanos y artículo 19 de la Declaración Universal de los Derechos Humanos.
Afternoon and welcome to World War Z, a Brighteon TV exclusive. I'm your host Maria Zeee, and today we have a powerful broadcast for you with world-renowned economist Martin Armstrong here to give his insight into the current situation that we find ourselves in, that being potential World War III. This broadcast today is brought to you by the Satellite Phone Store, and let me tell you, their sales are currently skyrocketing because people are realizing we're approaching increasingly challenging times that put our communications at risk. Visit sat123.com/Maria today and get yourself secure, encrypted communication to stay in touch with your loved ones in the event of a cyber attack style event, which many are warning is coming. We'll be back after this short break and a word from Brighteon. Well, the verdict's out. The globalists want war. Over the past 2 weeks, we have seen an escalation like never before, with multiple countries either inserting themselves or being pushed into their involvement in the Middle East. As the saying often goes, follow the money. Whilst that for the most part is usually true, could also be the case that these powers that be use the money situation to simply capitalize on a preordained motive and capitalize on the financial gains available while they're at it. As we've seen from some of this financial modelling, it appears they are definitely driving towards World War III, some sort of imminent financial collapse and ultimately complete destruction of the world as we know it. Whilst this may be set in stone as far as the powers that be are concerned, God is always on the side of humanity. And if we sound the alarm bells loud enough now, we may be able to stop their plans for the betterment of mankind. Whatever the case, what is undeniable is that this is definitely of biblical proportions. And it should come as no surprise that more people are clinging to their faith right now more than ever. I commend this approach. As always, we'll continue to report on the truth of the world today, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be at times, and we want to thank Brighteon TV for their commitment in this. You can find our show airing live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern on Brighteon TV on Roku or on brighteon.tv, and all of Z Media's content is available on zmedia.com. Martin Armstrong is a world-renowned economist who has a strong understanding of geopolitical issues, and his economic forum has been referred to as the better alternative to Davos. He says the situation in Israel was definitely planned, and he has strong reasons for this belief. We're honoured to have him join us now to discuss this and which direction we can expect the world to go in over the next few years. Here's Martin now. Martin Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure to join you.
Well, I'm very, very interested to hear your take on what's happening in the world at the moment. I know many actually in our audience have been saying, when are you going to catch up with Martin Armstrong? We always appreciate his insight. So very, very much looking forward to this conversation. I heard you make a statement recently, Martin, that basically they needed this war. So obviously we have a huge situation right now in the Middle East, which is very quickly escalating. What is your take on this situation?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's the same thing as 9/11. I mean, they knew they were going to, attack the World Trade Center, and they let it happen, and then they get all this, power out of it. They got the Patriot Act. Suddenly, you couldn't wire any money to an individual. more than $3,000. Who were they? And all this other sort of stuff. Here in Israel, I mean, I have very good contacts, and I mean, I basically was told, number one, that the guards at the border were reassigned 2 days before. I mean, anybody that's been to Israel knows that, it's about the size of New Jersey. I mean, how would it take hours for the military to even respond? It's crazy.
Well, that's a very good point. I think I tried to work it out. We're talking about maybe around 4 hours, 5 hours max to get from the top to that location.
It's really absurd, really. And this was created. They knew it was coming. There's no way you would have 1,000 people gathering on the other side of the fence and nobody knew it. I mean, there's surveillance all over the place. I mean, I've driven down the West Bank and I've been to Israel. It's basically like a fortress, and that fence, if a cat touches it, it goes off. It's absurd, really, this whole thing. And what it's really about is, I mean, even Hillary Clinton had said the way to beat Russia is by attrition. And they have no problem using everybody else as their drones, basically, Ukraine, etc. And this is to bring in Russia into the Middle East. They know they're there behind Iran. They're going to be behind Syria. And many of the other places, so they want them to come in, to get involved again. The Israeli people ought to wake up, really, because they're like the Ukrainians. There's almost 10 million of them that have fled the country, and when are they ever going to go back? It's done. I mean, these neocons only want war, and they were started by Bill Kristol's father, and I know Bill, all right, and he was chief of staff in the White House to Quayle under, and who was the vice president under Bush. Now he's over there advising the Democrats. Whoever will create war, that's where he goes, all right, and the rest of them. So, in my opinion, the only thing I can explain about these people is I think that when Gorbachev said, "We will bury you," they all got riled up and said, "Well, we're going to take democracy to the rest of the world." Well, the problem is communism collapsed. China's not communist, and neither is Russia. Communism means the government owns everything. China just kept the name because they wouldn't have to admit that the communism failed. But, c'est la vie, I mean, it's certainly not a communist country when you have billionaires running around buying everything. So I think that these people just are resentful from the standpoint that they never got to fire a shot. Communism fell by itself. And I mean, when Reagan was going to be meeting with Gorbachev, they were against it. They said, "Oh, you can never trust the Russians." So I think they turned it from communism to basically racism. And what are we fighting for? Russia has no intention of invading Europe. Those days are all gone. China doesn't want to come and occupy the United States, and Americans don't want to go occupy China. I mean, I don't know, but I think they still are living in, the 18th century of empire building sort of thing. But,
I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about that because there's sort of a known agenda of China wanting to be the world superpower by 2045. People say that China is involved, is really sort of pulling the WEF strings. I don't necessarily agree with that, but there are people that think this way. Are you saying that's actually not the thinking of the Chinese?
No. And the WEF, trust me, they're a bunch of academic communists, really. I know Schwab. He is a control freak. If you make even one mistake at the WEF, you're called in. He doesn't believe in mistakes or anything of that nature. And that's why his agenda is to control the world. He is a control freak. You'll own nothing and be happy and all this other kind of nonsense. He does have a bust of Lenin, who is his mentor, on a shelf in his office. I've seen it. We started our World Economic Conference in 1985. He started, his public or Davos in 1987. Everything I've done, he basically copies. Our 2032, where basically Republican forms of government are going to collapse, is what he calls the Great Reset. He's just trying to push it in his direction towards communism. I mean, even when Marcus Vetter did the movie on me, The Forecaster, he hired a production company to bring in Marcus to do the film on him called The Forum. I mean, it's been back and forth for I can't even tell you how long. But they are trying to drag Russia into the Middle East. And then they hope that will wear them down even more. And these people, they want to take NATO and just go straight in and conquer Russia, period.
Well, I've just read this morning, I don't know how true this is, but it appears it's happening, that Putin is meeting with the Hamas leader.
Yeah, I mean, he has tried, he knows what's going on now. And, people that are saying that, oh, Putin's the problem, I mean, that's propaganda. You remove Putin, and there are people, they have their neocons too. And they're the ones that have been screaming at him. And if you look at who's been threatening world, nuclear war, it's not Putin, it's the next tier back.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I've heard him make statements about, protecting innocent life. I've heard many, many people saying this is outrageous. What's happening? Israel's response is just completely, I mean, they're committing war crimes at this point. You don't go and kill innocents. This whole thing about proportionate response, what do you want Israel to do to defend itself? Well, before we answer that question, how about we ask who funds Hamas, who founded Hamas, Israel, and why did it take hours for the IDF to get there? Where is the CCTV of Hamas allegedly coming over the wall and taking the 200 hostages? Why are hostages thanking them as they're walking off? I'm not suggesting Hamas is this great organization. I'm saying there are holes in your story, Israel. So no, I'm not going to support you going and slaughtering thousands of innocent children in what you deem to be a proportionate response to something we still don't know if your actions are justified at all.
Well, let's assume that it's correct, that there were 1,000 people that I have at least seen videos of them in gliders coming over. I mean, but, they use gliders also to go across the border, in the north too, years ago. So that's not unusual. But let's assume there were 1,000 people. This is different than a normal terrorist attack. A normal terrorist attack is like 10 guys in a camel, okay? You're talking about, this is a response that is intended to bring in Israel, the army. And that's the problem. I see this as one big trap, assuming Israel's not involved in it, but I think what they did, and the neocons thought that they could allow this to happen, draw in Russia, and it would be contained. But this is not going to be contained. even Ron Paul said these neocons have been waging wars for 30 years and they never won a single one. But assuming there was 1,000 people, that is different. Okay. And Hamas does use the Palestinians as a shield. My sources say that even Hamas, the vast majority of them are not even Palestinians.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It's like they start getting these religious jihad type thing. There are people coming from different areas as well. So do they care about the Palestinians? No. They use them as a shield anyhow. So this is a very complex situation. And you have to really look at Hamas is more of a terrorist organization. It's not really just Palestinians. I mean, I've been talking to both sides. I mean, the common people don't want war on either side. It's simple as that. I mean, there was an old, I think the oldest veteran from World War I. He said, 45 million people have died. We should have just taken the politicians, throw them all in a room together and let them sort it out.
I agree.
It is always the leadership that creates the wars, not the people on the ground.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, my question, again, I keep repeating this. My first question when this entire thing happened was why Israel and why now? Because I don't think that anything that happens today is not by design. They're financially motivated, as you stated. They can't keep going in this debt system that they've created. This is another push towards the Great Reset. I want to talk to you about that goal of 2032 and what Socrates has said as well. But you even mentioned, did Socrates forecast the Israeli invasion? What that's on your website right now, armstrongeconomics.com, for anyone who doesn't know. What was apparently Socrates appears to have picked the Hamas attack.
Yes, I learned that back in the 1980s. We had a client who was a Universal Bank of Lebanon, and they found a book in the basement with the Lebanese pound down, I think back to 1850 or something, and they asked if we could create a model. I said, sure. We stuck it in, and out came it said, your country is going to fall apart, in 6 days or 8 days it was, and I thought there was something wrong with the data. So I went back to him. I said, look, something's got to be wrong. I said, this is what it said. And very calmly, they asked me, well, which currency would be best? I said, well, it says the Swiss franc. And sure enough, Socrates got it right, and the Civil War began. So I then saw we had a Saudi client. It was the biggest in shipping. And he called me and he says, what do you think gold's going to do tomorrow? Iran's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf. I said, you tell me a war is going to start tomorrow? Yeah. What do you think gold's going to do? And I learned over the course of the years is that people who are going to create something, they do know, and they start moving their money in advance. That's what Socrates is picking up. They can't tell me you did something versus, somebody else, but it just says, hey, something's happening here. And I mean, there were rumors around that, why I published that out, that shares in Grumman were starting to go up in advance. The same thing happened with 9/11. The SEC took our basic analysis and started looking at who was buying puts on airlines a few days before. This is what they do. And the terrorists in particular, I noticed that they would take a position in the market to make money on each event to fund the next one. So somebody clearly, in this case, Socrates picked it up. It showed it, and I posted the charts on Grumman. Northrop Grumman and Israeli currency, and looking at the other markets around, clearly it was picking up. And now Socrates picks it up because the capital is moving. It's not like clairvoyant or something.
No.
If something is not moving, it wouldn't pick it up. So it is picking up something and saying, hey, people are shifting, this is what's going on. So you're looking at, clearly people knew. Somebody knew, whether it was the Hamas side or the Israeli side is interesting, but there were definitely purchases going on in Northrop Grumman. I mean, we publish a war index, which is a accumulation of a bunch of stocks that would benefit during war. I published that maybe a couple of weeks before that was going up when the Dow was going down. So clearly something has been in the works. And I believe these neocons, they're doing what Hillary Clinton said before. You start wars on many fronts, and you can take down Russia by attrition. But the problem is
the ultimate goal is to take down Russia.
Look, they've been doing this for a long time. If you go back to Obama wanted to go into Syria, why? Because they wanted to run a pipeline from Qatar through Syria to Europe to basically cut Russia out of the energy business. I mean, this has been going on all the time. I mean, it's now come out that the CIA trained Ukrainian special forces and they took out Nord Stream. Then on top of that, they cut a deal so that Europe would keep its mouth, shut. They cut a deal with Nigeria and to run a pipeline from Nigeria through Africa up to Europe. And then there was a coup in Niger where the pipeline was going through. Who hopped on the plane immediately? Victoria Nuland. Why is the State Department in the United States and the Queen of Neocons interested in a pipeline in Niger and a coup? I mean, everything is connected. I mean, these people have been trying to undermine Russia for decades. And Victoria Nuland, her family comes from Ukraine. So I don't know if it's personal grudges or what this is, but she is there regardless if it's a Republican or Democratic. And these people are bureaucrats. They never leave. And so I would say that clearly, one, they knew in advance. And two, I think that this was deliberate to try and draw in Russia. Then you had Lindsey Graham, who is a real neocon. He's out there saying that we should go in and attack and take out the oil production of Iran because they fund Hamas. You do that, and Russia is coming in. I mean, you have now taken this clearly from a regional conflict to world war.
Yes.
You can't be that stupid to say that. I think it was on Meet the Press, no less.
I saw that. And I thought this is so transparent. It couldn't be any more transparent if they tried. Martin, stay with us. I want to talk to you on the other side of the break about the economy, what we see happening over the next few years, the Great Reset. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, we are here with Martin Armstrong. I want to talk to you, Martin, about what happens now with energy, with oil. If this continues to escalate and go the way that it looks like it's going to go, is the West going to be affected by oil prices? We're already seeing oil prices rising. And how far will this really go?
Well, you're looking at 20% of the world's oil supply goes to the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, you bring in Russia and you actually try to attack Iran. If I were them, I would cut off the oil supply, and then you would watch the price of oil go up dramatically. I mean, this is just, it's really insane. But our computers has been longer term bullish on oil, not bearish, despite all the climate change nonsense. I mean, and that is nonsense. There's no way you can cut the entire world off of fossil fuels and expect it just to, oh, okay, we'll just merge this way. I mean, that would be a major, absolute economic depression that would probably last 26 years.
Yes, it's insanity. And, we have examples of how this is failing all over. I think, I can't remember which country it is, but they're having to rely on coal power again because they've shut all these different plants, trying to, do everything off solar. It's impossible. For example, here in Australia, we shut down a coal power plant in New South Wales, and the minute that we shut it down, we had to borrow energy from 2 coal power plants in Victoria and Queensland to supply the area that coal plant used to supply. I mean, it's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. And I think, Martin, maybe you can comment on this. Green stocks are dropping drastically. People are not investing in this nonsense anymore. It's losing popularity.
Yes, look, it's a fiction, really. I mean, we have some of the biggest institutional funds as clients, and they've even asked us, can you design a green portfolio where we at least break even? I mean, just to be politically correct. I mean, it's pathetic. It's the same thing that with even the woke agenda that you saw with Budweiser. I mean, even, it's impacting even Walt Disney. I mean, you can't go to these different routes, and you would have thought that Budweiser would have at least thought about who their clients were.
Well, no, it's just proof that they're trying to force this down people's throats, and the people are rejecting it en masse. That's the reality. You're not going to force me to celebrate LGBT every day of my life. You're just not. And that's it. People have had enough of it. So I want to ask you on that note, Martin, because you and I have spoken about this before, the Great Reset. Klaus wants it done by 2030. We've got the UN pushing for their one world government and Agenda 2030. You're adamant that we will get the chance to recreate government. What happens between now and 2032, according to your analysis and what Socrates is showing?
Well, I think the real catalyst to chaos is going to be the 2024 election. I mean, what they're doing to Trump is turning into a contagion. You've seen Argentina do it. Now Brazil is doing it. Oh, that's a good idea. I mean, Zelensky did it. Anybody that's going to stand up and oppose a leader, oh, you get criminally prosecuted and thrown in prison. I mean, it shows that democracy is collapsing. And that's what I mean about, this is a Republican form of government. It's not democracy. They lie to us. Just as, you had a vote down there on the changing the land rules, and everybody votes against it, and the states want to do it anyhow.
Yes.
I mean, it's a joke. The whole thing is a joke. I mean, are we ever allowed to vote, gee, shall we go to war against Russia? We don't get that right to vote. Do you want your taxes raised? We're never asked that. This is what a republic is about. We're supposed to be represented. But the problem is, it's not much different than a monarchy, because the politicians become career politicians. And once that happens, they're like aristocrats. All right. They're never on our side. So we're just the great unwashed, and we need to be taken, turned upside down and shaken to get as much money out of our pockets as whatever they think that we might have. This whole digital currency thing, they are pushing this because they think it will eliminate the underground economy, and their tax revenue will increase by 35%. That's what this is all about.
Is that worldwide that they're aiming for 35% increase in taxes, or just in the United States?
This is Europe's 35% is what they're
okay. It's coming everywhere then. Everywhere.
Yeah. But the whole point is that the economy is collapsing. These people have abused it for so long. They've been borrowing money with no intention of ever paying anything back. China was the largest debt holder of the United States. Then you have the neocons basically threatening to defend Taiwan and go to war against China. Just today, Biden came out and said, we will defend the Philippines against China. How many wars does this guy want to create? And then on top of all of this nonsense, what you then want to go back to him and say, gee, would you lend me $100 billion so I can buy some bullets to shoot you? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. And I think that's part of the problem, that these people just have an agenda and they don't look at the economy or the big picture of anything. So the climate change people only look at that. They don't look at the fact that if you actually shut off all fossil fuels, you'd create a major depression and probably civil unrest, and they're going to come after you.
Yep.
They don't even look at that. And these neocons just always want war, and they don't think about what if they say no, and they turn on you. How many jail cells are you going to have for people to take selfies because they went into the White House, went into the Capitol building? I mean, in some great insurrection, without guns.
Yes, the great insurrection, never mind that we had pro-Palestine supporters basically taking over Capitol Hill just the other day. That wasn't an insurrection. I'm all for people protesting for what they believe in, but you've set a precedent now that you can't protest inside Capitol Hill, otherwise you'll be called an insurrectionist, but they weren't deemed insurrectionists. I mean, the double standards are just disgusting.
Well, there are statutes for insurrection, of which I will point out, not a single one was charged with that.
Yep.
They throw that out because in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, if you participated in an insurrection, you can't run for office. So they're just trying to use that against Trump.
Yeah.
It's just more political propaganda. And the main reason they're afraid of Trump, and they're also afraid of Kennedy, they don't want anybody from outside. They will. Doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, as long as they're from Capitol Hill, they all know we don't mess with the swamp. They all are involved in it. I think Trump was a little bit naive and he went in there initially and he's going to actually reform something. And they all turned against him, both parties. The neocons started, Iran had shot down just an unmanned drone, and Bolton wanted to invade Iran. He said, I'm not going to do that. Just because nobody was killed. These people just want war all the time. So
I want to ask you, I'm sure that this entire situation is also somehow tied. I mean, it's all tied in some way, also somehow tied to the 2024 elections. Yuval Noah Harari, the little twerp, has said that 2024 will be the last year of elections. Does your system and your thinking align with there still being 2024 elections in the United States, or is that done and dusted?
Now it's probably over with. After 24, you're going to see war.
So we're saying no elections in 2024?
Our computer, and you can check, I put this out more than 10 years ago, is that 2024 would be if it takes place, it would be the most unreliable, election in history. The computer's been right on all of that. I mean, even at least 10 years before it, for the 2016 election, it had put out that that would be the first time a third party candidate could possibly win. And that ended up being Trump. Although he was within Republic, he was really a third party because both sides hated him. And 2024, it basically says if we have election, it's not going to be real. And you can see what they're doing with Trump or whatever. I mean, honestly, if he was elected, I think they would assassinate him before his hand hit the book. They just can't. They can't afford that. If Trump got in, he now knows the game. He'd shut down, start firing all these neocons. Our computer said we're going into war, so I can't imagine that they're going to let him in.
As in the United States will go into war?
Yeah. I mean, I've met heads of state around the world, all over. And I met with, Trump. I had dinner at Mar-a-Lago, I think it was in March of 2020. And he was actually the first head of state that actually impressed me. He said he wanted to pull out the troops from Afghanistan, but the reason why, he said he was sick and tired of writing letters to their families to say, oh, your son died for God and country. And he said, what are we doing there? One, they've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make? That's why he wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. And it was the first head of state that ever even mentioned the families left behind. Everybody else, it's like, oh, gung-ho, that's it. We're going to defeat them, whatever. Nobody ever talked about the people that actually died on the battlefield. And I was, but that, I think, showed the difference between Trump and a career politician. A career politician would never say that. Trump didn't know that he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
So I think that's, the difference. I mean, yeah, Trump's got a mouth on him that gets him in a lot of trouble back and forth or whatever. But he at least impressed me on that issue. And I thought that was clearly not a career politician response.
So when you say that the United States is likely going to war next year, is this, we're hearing a lot of, and I suppose, I mean, you can't be certain of specifics, but we're hearing a lot now about sleeper cells. We've just had a notice this week about Hezbollah potentially coming in and invading. This was from the Epoch Times. U.S. Department of Homeland Security officials must assume that hundreds of Iranian-funded and directed terrorist operatives with Hamas, Hezbollah, and similar groups are in the United States and can carry out lethal attacks across the country. I note a lot of these media outlets that people depended on are issuing a lot of propaganda, one-sided propaganda as well. So it's very hard to know who to trust. But, this rhetoric around sleeper cells has been increased. I think it's just to increase fear and continue justifying, the war in Israel, make people believe that it's okay to go and level an entire place and we need to be at war with, every Islamic country. That's what I think that they're doing, Martin. I could be wrong. But is it likely going to be something that lasts the whole year?
We're looking at war probably, particularly between 25 going into 27. 27 would probably be about the peak of it. But you do have to realize that the biggest mistake was opening the borders, not just in the United States, but in Europe.
Yep.
I have friends there in Europe, and France is overwhelmed with Arabs. So is Germany, Austria. Now, some of them are, very religious, and would sign up with with the Shiite side. The others who are Sunni or not, they just want to live. That's it. The problem in the United States is they have absolutely no idea. I mean, people from China have come over, go into Mexico, and walk across the border. I mean, this was the biggest mistake, I think, in history. So where World War I and World War II, they were not allowed, they couldn't do that sort of thing. And they even put all the Japanese in prison just because they were Japanese. So I do think you're probably going to have domestic terrorism both in Europe and the United States. I mean, it'd be hard to say it's not going to happen.
I'm certainly not. I want to be clear here, Martin. I'm certainly not saying that there aren't certain people of the Islamic faith who aren't, who don't subscribe to this ideology of jihad and violent jihad, and this absolutely exists, and it is dangerous, and I condemn that altogether. And I'm not saying that these sleeper cells don't exist either. In fact, a very, very close relative of mine was in Europe, couldn't go to the bus stop because she would be raped. So this exists. And it is absolutely from people from the Middle East who've come who think it's okay to do that to women because they're just meat or whatever. Some people actually think this way. It's dangerous. It doesn't belong in the West at all. But here we are opening our doors to it. So Europe has that huge problem. What I'm saying is that I think that the narrative right now is stoking further war and creating hatred in between groups to keep the division going.
Well, yes. I mean, even you take the whole transgender issue. You can Google it. I mean, I found the number of people that identify as transgender in the United States was 0.4%. So you're not even talking about 0.5%. Where did all this money come to push this as an agenda? I mean, we had one employee who was gay. He doesn't even understand all the different labels that they're applying to people anymore.
Many of them don't.
And it seems as though this is being used to divide people. I mean, they certainly were not a big enough group to have money to push a propaganda, mission this large. So it's other people behind it. And we also have some African-American employees, and one was basically saying that the Black Lives Matter was taken over by other people. So it seems like one of these agendas, whatever it is being usurped by people with other alternatives. So yes. I wouldn't put anything past any of this stuff. It's all supposed to keep us divided. If we are divided, then we don't all get together and rise up against the government.
Yes, exactly. Who are all working together in lockstep to bring about the Great Reset, and very, very few are fighting back against it. Martin, I want to, in the last minute here, if you can tell everyone about your upcoming conference. It's happening in Florida.
Yes, in the land of the free and home of the brave. It's in Orlando. It might be our last one because if people are prevented from traveling after this year, which is starting to percolate as well. We're going to have to see what really happens. They might end up having to be virtual events, but we've been holding these since 1985. A lot of people, they like them because it's almost like a college reunion. They get to meet people from all over the place. We have some good friends have been attending for years from Western Australia. Farmers are coming in. They come in from absolutely everywhere. So it's more like a United Nations. And in fact, Nigel Farage came into our 2019 one in Rome. And he said, of course I'm here. He says, Marty's the alternative to Davos. So that was an interesting endorsement from Nigel, but
Well, I think it's a fantastic alternative to Davos. Martin, we're so appreciative of your time. ArmstrongEconomics.com. You can find more of Martin's insight, his posts. You can subscribe to his blog posts, his private posts as well, which he does regularly. He's always updating his audience, and also you can purchase tickets to the event in Orlando. Martin Armstrong, thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and take care of yourself down there.
Likewise. There is always more to every world situation than what is on the surface, and we're honoured to take part in digging deeper for the facts. Martin has given us a lot to think about, but ultimately we believe no one other than those orchestrating it actually want World War III. The people of the world are fed up with being told how their countries and lives should be run by power-hungry, bloodthirsty megalomaniacs who see us as nothing but pawns in their game, which ultimately always leads to loss of innocent life. It's not too late for the people of the world to stand up against this. Surely no one is consenting to being nuked. The time is long overdue for humanity to stand up against these evil, wicked power structures in government, at Davos, at the WHO, UN, IMF. We have the opportunity to create a different world if we collectively demand an end to this never-ending cycle. Resistance is right and possible, and rising, and will continue to do so only if we say so. It depends on us. Thank you for tuning in today. We'll see you next week right here on Brighteon TV at 1 p.m. Eastern on Friday. God bless.